What is up, everybody? It is Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, the home of epic conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations. As always, I'm saying you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. 2018 award winner in the innovation given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And like I said, it's the home of Epic Conversations, and I'm the host of Epic Conversations. Always looking forward to having great people on the platform to continue our journey. And we have a returning friend now. He's not a stranger anymore. He is a friend of the Dr. Vibe Show, Mr. Matthew Solomon. How we doing this evening?
I'm doing great. I love it. I'm a friend of the Dr. Vibe Show. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You're
Put
a friend.
big smile on my face. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're all over that, my man. What's been going on in your wonderful world?
Oh, man. Well, apparently it's the beginning of a new decade and a new year and all of that. Because we were, last time we spoke was in December at the end of a decade and the end of a year. So, yeah, it's 2020. It's almost March.
Yeah.
And wow. It's plugging away. I moved. So I did that in January, and then just doing the work,
Okay. And you moved from where to where?
Culver City to Inglewood in Los Angeles. So it's like a 2 mile move, but with me and 3 kids, it's significant.
Are there any videos? I'd love to see some videos.
Not of us moving, but I post a lot on TikTok. Because my niece and my kids, so there's some stuff on TikTok that.
So you're a TikTok person.
Yeah. I jumped in, and it's pretty awesome. I have 2 accounts. I have a personal account, which is at Maddie the Glue, and then at the Relationship Guy, I post TikToks about relationships and communication.
So what's the fascination with TikTok? I have not jumped on yet.
Yeah, it's like my niece who's 11, and then my kids are all into it, and they're basically short videos, 15-second video clips. Mostly they're either dance related or funny or a combination of both or something. And then there's different kinds of videos that trend. And so my niece likes to do the dance ones, and I like to dance. And so she'll teach me the routine, and then we'll do the dance one together, and we'll post those. And then, I'll do funny ones with my kids, and my son actually likes to dance also. So it's any combination of that, but it's the kind of, you get sucked in though, and you're just scrolling and watching video after video after video. But there's some really great, fun talent on there.
Yeah. I'll see if I can fit it into my agenda.
Yeah.
Haven't got there yet. You've been on before, but can you just give a little high level about who you are and what you're about before we get involved in this epic conversation?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Matthew Solomon. I am the coach for the Modern Soul, and I'm a relationship and empowerment coach. And I work with individuals, I work with couples, and I've expanded that into working with corporations and colleges and organizations, because at the root of everything, we're in relationship to everything and everyone. And so when we can create partnership, that's when things tend to work. And so, whether I'm working with a couple or 150 people in a seminar, it's really the same thing, just people learning how to listen and understand and get each other's point of view so that we can actually heal and transform and create something new.
Wonderful. I'd like to shout out people who are watching live right now on Get Vocal, on YouTube, on Periscope, on Facebook Live. Thanks everyone for watching live. And also, if you don't have time watching on the replay, if you're watching live, please feel free to provide comments, ask questions. We'd appreciate that. Also, subscribe to the channel wherever you are. It's appreciated, not taken for granted. And also, if you're watching on Vocal, you can actually jump into the room. With that all done, we have another boring conversation topic tonight. The importance of listening to heal racism, sexism, and other isms. Mm-hmm. So before we talk about the isms, let's talk about listening. And what do you feel is the state of listening in our current culture?
There's not much of it in our current culture. And the reality is we're not taught how to listen. We're not taught how to communicate. We're taught how to debate. We're taught to argue points and to argue a side and win, but we're not really taught how to listen to each other and the benefits of that. And my kids have grown up with use your voice, use your words. And as great as that is, like, that's a step. Like, we can all share stories, we can all express ourselves to one degree or another. And the reality is we're not taught and trained how to listen to each other in a way that really makes a difference. And so when we can do that, the results are amazing.
So let me ask, why do you feel we're not taught? Because it seems that this has been going on for many years. If it's a challenge that's been going on for years and years and years, why haven't we been taught how to listen?
Your guess is as good as mine as to the why. I guess it's just not, it hasn't been valued. It's been, our society, I think, is so go, produce results, get more, do more, win more, whatever, that a lot of times when I work with people initially and try and get them to slow down and listen, the resistance is, I don't have time for that, or it's not going to make a difference, or we're so geared towards, I need to express myself and putting our expression first, that we don't really stop to listen to the other person. And when we do that, we're just butting heads. So is the why. Like, we're it's funny because in school, our sex education is nothing. It's, you're going to catch a disease and get pregnant, so don't do it or wear a condom. And then communication isn't even addressed. Finances aren't really even addressed. And then we're told, go out into the world and get married, have kids, have relationships, and survive. But we're not given the tools to do that.
Okay. So what do you feel makes a good listener? What would you describe someone who's a good listener?
Somebody who is really invested in understanding what the person they're listening to is expressing. So if you and I are having a conversation and I'm sharing something about myself that's, maybe it's something really intense, something really upsetting, or something I'm excited about, when I feel that you're invested in my experience, that you really want to understand, and on some level you're putting yourself in my shoes and reflecting that back to me in some way, I open up and I feel at ease, and I feel like, wow, somebody gets me, and now I have a partner in this, and now we can, there's room, there's a connection that happens. So that's what a good listener is. Somebody who's invested in really wanting to understand what the other person is sharing.
I'm going to be totally transparent, as I like to be. Last night I was at a big event. There was an organization that I support that was having their 7-year anniversary. And I had to have a conversation with a gentleman who we know of each other online. He came in from Vancouver to get an award, and we were having a conversation. And I had said something, then he was saying some stuff, and I felt so bad at the end of the evening because I kept on interrupting. I said, that I was a terrible listener, a terrible listener, because he said, hold on a minute, and I let him say a few more words, and I kept on going, and it bothered me last night because that I said, that's not good.
Yeah.
That's not really good. So I can relate to what we're having a conversation about tonight in regards to listening and the isms. So before we went live tonight, Matthew and I were going, where are we going to start first? Where are we going to start? We don't know who we're going to do start first. So let me, you know what?
Flip a coin.
Yeah. You got it. Okay. So I'm going to flip a coin. So what do you want? What do you want heads to be?
All right, heads sexism, tails racism.
Hey, hold on. That was a terrible flip, because not only that, I lost the coin. Oh my gosh. Let me try another one. Here we go again. Okay. It's heads.
Okay, well, that was sexism. All right,
So
and wait, I gotta just say, how horrible of me as a cis white man to be flipping a coin, sexism versus racism. Also,
you put in that you're sitting in the chair, so you got to feel good in it, my brother.
Right.
You got to feel good about it.
Yeah,
So sexism,
yeah,
especially with the Me Too movement
yeah.
over the last few years, and we have a whole bunch of things going on. Got Harvey Weinstein trial
Hmm.
going on. We had the whole back and forth between Snoop Dogg and Gayle King.
Yeah.
So all these things have heightened. So where are we at, and where do you feel there hasn't been enough listening when it comes to sexism?
Well, I think so. One of the things, when you introduced me at the top of the show, and then I shared a little bit about myself. I wrote a book called Man School: Relating with Women in the Me Too Era, and that book came as a result of me having listened to women for years and years and years, worked with women, had women who are friends, women who are clients, and they have always felt open to share with me their experiences around dating, their experiences in their relationships. Uh, Many of them have shared with me experiences when they've been raped and molested and harassed. And so when the Me Too movement online happened, and Me Too, I always say, it began in 2006 by a woman named Tarana Burke to really support Black women and women of color in not only sharing their stories, but having the resources to take people to court and to be supported. But when Me Too Online happened, and my timeline on Facebook was flooded with all of these stories, I understood, what was happening. I had been in these conversations, and I recognized, yeah, this is a thing. And there were many men who didn't understand and who didn't know how to respond or how to act or how to be supportive, and were questioning a lot of times questioning women's stories. And so I would get into conversations with them, sharing what I've heard from women, what women have shared with me. And as a result, women were seeing what I was doing. They're like, oh my God, a man who's been listening, you get it. Please write a book or teach a class or something. And so I wrote a book, and then now I have an online course. And so what, listening in relation to that is what we saw was mostly women sharing their stories around Me Too, and then mostly men pushing back, saying that can't be right. You must have misinterpreted that. Any level of so many different levels of things, and what could have been a really amazing opportunity for men collectively to say, "Oh my God, we didn't know that was happening on this magnitude. We're so sorry. How can we support? What can we do? What do you need?" uh, most of us got into a defensive space or dismissed it altogether. Like I remember there was shoot, I forget what magazine, like Cosmopolitan or something, a couple years ago, that only 35 or 40% of men even knew what Me Too was.
Oh,
Yeah. How does listening show, where are we at? I think we're still in a place where we're not really listening to each other. Some of us are. And then for those of us who aren't, we just keep butting heads and digging in and saying, well, no, that's your work, or they're saying that's your work, and we're not really coming together to heal. And when we listen, that's the space that opens up healing.
okay. Interesting. I had a gentleman on last week named D. Chanson Berry, who is just going to be debuting a movie called Dark Girls 2.
Mm-hmm.
And him and a gentleman named Lee. Oh, Why am I forgetting? Him and another gentleman produced the first Dark Girls, and it's a documentary about women in color and colorism and how they would use creams to, become more light
Mm-hmm.
skinned.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that a member of the audience asked him was live was that how can Black men help Black women overcome their challenges? And the first three words he said was listen to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He said, so do you feel in the area of male female relationships and maybe to reduce the sexism that exists in this world today, listening to the women or women is something that some men need to work on?
I think all people need to work on it, honestly. And as a relationship coach, the everybody who comes to me is the root is a communication issue. Couples come to me, they've been together 15 years. They were in love at one point. They've had kids, and then they can't stand the sight of each other. They can't even face each other on a couch. So what do? I have them turn and face each other. And I just have them be with each other, just be present. And what happens is all this stuff that's in the way starts to melt away, and they get present, and they start to remember what it is that they love, and they connect. And then I start teaching them how to listen. And I go step by step, and I usually, one of them will share something, the other person will respond, and then I'll coach them through how to listen to each other. And so when they start listening from really trying to understand each other and get each other's experience and what's important to them and why they're sharing what they're sharing, that's when literally every time I've never felt heard like this in our entire relationship, or I haven't felt this, felt listened to in 10, 15 years like this, or I wish we would have done this sooner, because honestly, everything just kind of, all the crap that we build up, all the resentment, all the, I need to get mine, you need to get yours, and all of that stuff just disappears because we get invested in each other and we create a partnership. So taking that into the sexism conversation, if we're really listening and there's no agenda and there's no reason to defend ourselves, I can be in conversations with women who say all men are trash, because I understand where they're coming from, and I understand what's behind that. And the thing is, the more that I'm able to be with that and say, yeah, I can understand why you feel that way, without saying not all men, without saying, well, I'm not, without saying without interjecting any of that. If I can and they get the experience of me sitting there saying, yeah, I understand, then something happens. Then their defenses come down. Then they're like, oh my gosh, you're actually listening, and let me open up. And then as a coach, a lot of times I have the experience where women feel safe in expressing even more and more and more with me. And then that's where their healing comes in, and the transformation comes in. So yeah, I guess in a long way of answering your question, it's crucial. Everybody needs to do it. As a man, feeling heard, having a partner, or not even a partner, having another person who's really interested in why I'm sharing what I'm sharing, who can understand where I'm coming from, then I feel, oh my gosh, somebody cares, somebody hears me. I have a partner in this in some way.
Okay. Let me ask, and I'll probably bring up this conversation piece when we talk about racism, but let me introduce it in our conversation of sexism. What impact have these two things had on listening and sexism? A, the media, and B, hereditary, meaning generational. So which one would you look at first?
The impact on listening? Is it?
Yes. Yeah. Listening and sexism.
Well, hereditary or generational, it's, my parents didn't really do this. Their parents sure as heck didn't do this. I think over, generations, when gender roles were more of a thing and they were established, this is what men do and this is what women do. And, even if we want to get into conversation around the patriarchy and all of that, where women didn't really have a voice, generations back, and to a large extent, they have more of a voice now, but it's not equal. It's not equal. I think generationally, it's just something, again, we weren't taught. What I was taught, and when I was studying relationships, I've been studying relationships for 20 years, it was women sit around in circles and talk about everything, and men go off and hunt and don't really talk. And so it was women are more verbally expressive, men aren't. And what I found in doing work with men is we want to talk, we want to express ourselves. There's a deep desire to really, our lives depend on us being able to share and feeling heard and feeling accepted and loved, really. That, and the suicide rate for men is as high as it is because we suppress our emotions. Like, we're taught at a young age, don't cry, suck it up. That's not how men do it. Be a man. And so the more that we do that, the more alone we feel. And so I had this experience we were talking about. I was on a summit. Cars are driving by in my new neighborhood. Motorcycles. Okay. I was on a panel with 8 other men talking about masculinity and diversity and what it's like to be men and how we grew up. And this was a really diverse group, different races, ages, political affiliations, like all across the board. And at the root of it, when we started talking about our fathers and how we grew up, and many of us are fathers, and what that looked like and what that meant, for all of us, pretty much, we like that sense of feeling loved and being able to express ourselves was just like, it wasn't a thing. We all have, like, there was one man who he's been married 3 times, and he said on our call, with the group of us on our panel, that he shared more on our panel than he did to any of his 3 wives in the 3 marriages he was in.
What does that tell you?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Mm-hmm. That's really, really crazy. So you covered about the generational. What about
media
and
right.
the media of listening and sexism?
Yeah, well, media is, that's another thing. News used to be news and supposedly unbiased. And now we got to get a headline. We got to get the story out first. The more polarizing, the better, because that's where we get ratings from. And so I think, on some level, while it's a good tool to get information out, we have to be so discerning in what we're hearing, who we're hearing it from, depending on what you already believe or what your peers, your families believe. There's a news station that will just feed you that information that supports that line of thinking. And so in the media, we're not really listening either. Or the media is not really listening either. The media is trying to get viewers and sell ad space and all of that. So it's really tough, and then when we get into the deep work of communication and partnerships and relationships, it's much more sensational to share horror stories or to, show debates than it is to, I had an idea years ago, when I first got married. So 2003, I was like, there should be a good news network, a network that's just good news, tells all the things that people do. And I shopped it around, and people were like, nobody's really interested. People are interested, but not at a level where it's actually going to sell. And I know that there's some of that happening now, like outlets for that. But still, if you tune into whether it's Fox or CNN or even local news, it's, somebody got shot, this happened, this trial, that murder, this thing, and so there's not a lot of room, and there's no modeling. There's no modeling for how to have successful relationships and to communicate.
How just jumping back in regards to the generational piece, when we see a lack of listening when it comes to sexism, can it be said that maybe one of the reasons why it's not further ahead in a positive direction is that some men just don't want to let go? And how can I say, they have the wanting or needing to adjust with the times is just a tough overcome battle challenge for them. So sexism comes up as use a last line of defense, maybe.
Yeah, well, I think, with all of this, whether it's sexism or racism, there's a spectrum of what the response is. On one side, there's in terms of sexism, there's the men who really want to get it and be supportive and amplify and do what we can to heal this. On the total opposite end, there's that's just feminism, or we can't win, or if we do this, we give up our power, and then people they're gonna come for us, and nobody's safe, and so there's all of that. And I remember talking to a man about a year and a half ago. There was a man, he was in his 60s, and he was like, I wish we could just go back to the way things were in the 70s, where none of this was happening. And I was like, it's not that none of this was happening. It was happening. It's just nobody was talking about it. There wasn't a movement. There wasn't support. There wasn't, women had less of a voice then. So yeah.
Okay. Well, no, that's good. Okay. Let's transition over to the whole area of racism and a lack of listening. And living in Canada and looking at what's going on in your country, the United States, I really think, well, definitely in the area of sexism, but the area of the lack of listening and racism has escalated over the last number of years for a number of reasons. One or two we can certainly say here are obvious, but has it always existed, especially, well, just taking a look at American society, a lack of listening and racism has been prevalent throughout its history?
Yeah. It's been, the lack of listening has been prevalent. The dismissing it, for, as a white person, saying, well, that's not me, I don't do that, and not even being willing to look at what is that, and do I contribute, do I benefit from that in some way, and those conversations are so can be so triggering, for white folks, because like the last thing we want to do is be labeled a racist. And so we get into these conversations. I get into these conversations where white people are so clear that their preference isn't racist, or what they said wasn't racist because of their intention, but what they're missing is the impact that it has on a person, on a Black person, or a person of color, or an indigenous person. And so if we're not listening to each other's lived experiences, like, I can't tell you what it's like to be Black in Canada. Like, there's no, it would just be ridiculous for me to do that. And yet culturally, we white people tend to assume, what consciously or unconsciously, that we're the authority on everything, because that's kind of how things have been set up, through the media, through our history, like history books, and what we're taught and how we're taught, and how we're marketed to. My background is, I was in the entertainment business, and I was in music, and then I worked in commercials and commercial casting. And so over the years, it's gone from, we need that token person of color, whatever color that is, just to have that token person in a commercial, to moving into, okay, we need more of that representation. And now there's, there are commercial campaigns that are where there's more representation. There's more like Black people or more people of color in commercials. And I've seen that in the movies too. There was, I'm going to date myself, but Robert Townsend, Hollywood Shuffle, that movie was largely a part of that.
Yeah, great movie.
Largely about that. Yeah.
So when we take, and I think the first time, if I remember myself correctly, that I found out about you was an article basically about race, the entertainment industry, lack of representation still going on. And you deal with a lot of corporate organizations and institutions. On a scale of 1 to 10, larger organizations, are they listening? What is their listening capacity when it comes to racism? If you want to score it on a scale on a 1 to 10 scale, what would you give them?
The listening capacity overall, I would say, would be pretty low. Would probably be a 2 or a 3. They are implementing programs because they recognize they have to cover their butts, and a lot of the programs that are implemented, unfortunately, are the traditional, like, check your box. Okay, we did, we did the racism training, so we can say we did that and legally we're covered. But what a lot of that training doesn't get into, and what's missing, is the listening part, and the listening to, what, first of all, why do we want a diverse corporate culture or university culture? Why do we want to be inclusive? Because it makes us better, because it represents everybody, because there's just it just becomes bigger and better. And so, but it's not enough to have people there that represent other races. It's like, we have to be inclusive. We have to understand what your needs are, what kind of spaces are safe for you. And that's one of the things that with some of the organizations I work at, is they're like, well, we're doing all this stuff, but we're having all these problems still. And so, but what's not happening is they're not listening to the people that are being affected, who have something to say about not feeling safe, and not feeling like their voice is heard, and not feeling like they can walk into spaces without having to deal with microaggressions or macroaggressions, or people who just haven't really done any work around this. So it's a constant defense thing.
What concerns me then, after you shared that with us, is if they weren't, let me put it out there, and you can push back on me on this if you'd like to.
Yeah.
In many of these organizations, if they weren't legislated to do it, would they do it? Would they even listen?
I tend to think not. And
Wow.
and because it's a dollars and cents thing. It's legislated. It's there are potential lawsuits. I think while there may be a desire, like, there's an organization that reached out to me to present for their function, and I was looking through their promotional materials, and it was all white faces. And I asked them, I said, what are you doing around diversity and inclusion and outreach? And they were like, well, we haven't done much. We would like to, but we haven't really done anything. What do you recommend?
Oh,
and,
wow.
and I was like, well, why haven't you done that? And they're like, well, they're just like plugging away, trying to get their thing going. And it's a thought, but it's not enough of a thought to stop and say, okay, let's make a significant effort here, and let's put some stuff in that. I think I shared with you last time that there was this comedian festival in Atlanta a year or so ago, where they had like 20 something comedians over however many days, and I think there were 2 Black men out of everybody else was white. And when people started pushing back, and I had messaged them also, they're like, well, we put out the thing, but nobody applied. At first they were like, these were the best of who applied, and we didn't want to exclude anybody, based, because of race. I was like, well, but you're in Atlanta. Like, this is really the best? And they were like, well, nobody applied. I was like, you're in Atlanta. What do you like? There were no Black people or people of color that applied. And so they actually did take a step back. They restructured. They invited some other comics in, and they issued a thing. But it took a lot. There were a lot of people who showed up on their Facebook page there were a lot of conversations that were had. I had a couple conversations, and they saw, but it took a lot. And again, like, this is like in Atlanta, they were having this issue where it just wasn't a consideration. And I feel like I'm talking a lot, but when in my movie career as a writer and director, I grew up in Los Angeles, and the schools that I went to were very integrated. And many of my friends from junior high specifically are still friends of mine now. And it's every race, religion, sexual orientation, and I would talk to my friends about diversity in casting, and literally they're like, you just how you grew up, you knew where you grew up, you just want to make your movie look like what your life looks like. It's not, it isn't really that hard or challenging to do. You just have to be we just have to be aware of it.
Yeah, it just seems like, sitting where I am in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
that especially when it comes to areas like racism, people ain't budging. A lot of people ain't budging. And what's even more concerning there are people that have a racist mindset that feel justified now to talk about it and not and shut down anything that's said against that mindset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, it just seems, and it's just interesting because you look at what's going on politically in the United States, the two sides ain't listening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like they talk about something called trickle down economics. It sounds like trickle down behavior.
Right.
Trickle down lack of behavior when it comes to listening. Like, no one wants to give an inch.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for some very right-wing organizations and individuals. Just leave it at that.
Sure. Well, there's money in it. There's if you want to look at it from the colonizer perspective and the origins of racism, like, it's all money and power. There's an investment in keeping things the way they are. There's an investment in not having these discussions or in arguing these from the there's somebody I know who I grew up with. He's about 15 years older than me, who grew up in the Valley here in Los Angeles, which is a very white section, and he swears up and down he's been the victim of reverse racism his whole life. And I'm like, you're white from the Valley and are very successful in your construction business. Like, this guy makes a lot of money. I said, what? Like, how do you figure that? And he was like, well, I wanted to be a firefighter in the 80s, and because of affirmative action, he wasn't allowed to be a firefighter. I'm like, that's your lifetime of reverse racism? Aside from the fact that that's not a thing, but
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to welcome on the conversation one of my mentors, Mr. Melvin Lars, longtime educator, social activist. And Melvin, it's always a pleasure to have you share on. I know that this is a topic that's very passionate to you, about listening and racism. What would you like to share with us? You're on. Okay.
First of all, guys, it's Dr. Vibe. Thank you for having me here, Brother Matthew. It was great to meet you. And as I just listening, as you gentlemen are sharing about racism, etc., I always find it embarrassing, laughable when I hear people talk about reverse racism, because you are openly admitting that racism exists.
Right.
However, you choose to ignore it for greed reasons. And when I hear conversations of that sort with my and Dr. Vibe, I call white people less melanated. When my less melanated friends and I have these conversations, I never let them get away from this question. And my question always is who asked any of us what race, hair color, size, etc. we were going to be? I like to hit my Christian melanated and less melanated brothers very simply. We all say we believe in the Bible and we just standing by God's word. Well, it says very simply, God has no respect of person. It says that very simply. It says very simply that man is made in God's image. Nowhere does it say that God separated man. He made, quote, white man, unquote. He made black man, all in separate situations, seeking different colors of soil and the whole nine. Now, I'll be very honest with you. The last thing I say, and I do say it, Matthew, I'll be very honest with you and Dr. Vibe. I do say to my buddies, and I do consider them friends. I honestly believe that we have really great respect for one another. But at the same time, I'm stubborn and some of them are stubborn. But I always ask this question. If today you walk into a store with me and you and I both have the same amount of money, we live in the same neighborhood, drive the same car, etc., but I get followed around the store, what did you call that? And of course, I get a lot of stammers. I get a lot of stutters because I ask you hear a lot of black people say, our skin is our albatross. People assume that you're coming in to be a criminal. They assume you don't have the funds. They assume that you're not a person that is to be respected. So, and one last thing, Dr. Vibe and Brother Matthew, I take them back to the Westerns. I said, how many of you guys watch Westerns? Of course, almost every hand goes up.
Yeah.
And my question is always the same. Now, you guys make heroes out of bank robbers, out of cattle barons who take other people's land, hire gunfighters. You idolize Jesse James. You idolize the Wyatt brothers, which we all knew were criminals, etc. But somehow, very strangely, people of color are the ones that are so violent and can't be trusted and have no moral standing. I said, but let's keep in mind, and I'll be done, guys, when we talk about the Mayflower, in Columbus's own handwriting, when he talked about the Indians, because they were so receptive, he saw these little sprinkles of gold, and his criminal mind went into work overdrive, sending a message back to the Queen that these people will be easy to, quote, paraphrased, take advantage of. So when I hear conversations, whether it be black people or white people, to talk about racism and that kind of thing, and we all have our definitions for racism, whether we admit it or not, and it talks about you can't be a racist if you can't affect someone's life, his lifestyle, etc. And I often tell people all the time, most of the time, all black people can do is piss you off. We don't own the factories to fire you. We're not in the legislature making rules, anything. We will piss you off by saying things that you don't want to hear. But on the reverse of that, a la present administration right now, you can put a guy, and it's still on the books, by the way, in a lot of states. You can put a guy in jail for spitting on the sidewalk, or you can give him a ticket. But you can have a man sitting in the White House who everybody knows is guilty, and everything is supposed to be okay. So and Dr. Vibe is very right. I'm an activist. I've always been, and I have excuse me, gentlemen, I have a lot of difficulty with the hypocrisy of human beings, regardless to how we label ourselves as being white or black or brown, etc. Because hatred has no color. And I'll leave it there.
Well said, Melvin.
Thank you.
Matt, what we want to add on to that?
I got nothing. I agree. I agree. I mean, yeah.
So, as Melvin was sharing there, Melvin, when you have these conversations with less melanated or non-melanated individuals, did they even listen to you, or they just look like they're listening to you and they just push it off? Do they even hear what? Are they listening to you? Are they hearing you? Or neither?
Some yes, some no. Some can be very condescending. I won't call this gentleman's name, but he has family members that live in Arkansas. As you know, I tell Dr. Vibe all the time, Brother Matthew, I grew up here in the Jim Crow South. I've lived basically every place except this as an adult until the last 6 years. Now, one friend of mine, we played football together at Louisiana Tech University, and he and I talk very often, and he talks about his family in Arkansas. And he says, man, he said, it doesn't matter what I say to my family, what anybody else say to them. He said, they are dyed in the wool racist. And so, and all that, excuse me. I want to answer Dr. Vibe's question. Yeah, some of them, I mean, we actually have conversations, and I always push with people because I'm certainly not flawless. Let's have a conversation about the realities of what's really taking place. Do I get a lot of rejection? Yes. Matthew, I've told Dr. Vibe, I was kicked off the Louisiana Tech football team way back in the early 70s because of my stance against racism. And that's documented. You know, I was according to them, troublemaker, rebel riser. Now take, I wasn't marching. I wasn't going to the coach's office raising a whole lot of hell. If there was something that was not going quite right, you know, I would address it with the coaches. Never did I get a banner walking over the campus with a placard or anything like that. But I was seen as a threat. So I'm just speaking personally about how as I address Dr. Vibe's question, some people listen, some condescending and just kind of nod their heads and still pass you off. But yes, Dr. Vibe, I consider myself very fortunate that I have encountered individuals, associates, and friends that do listen and that will sit down and take a stance. But I got to say this one last thing. I also understand a lot of times when they take a stance that they are putting not only themselves in jeopardy, but their families in jeopardy. So it's many times it's a catch-22.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. Anything again you want to add, Matthew?
Yeah, I wanted to share, and thank you so much, Melvin. Thank you. You know, I wanted to share one of the organizations at college that I'm doing this work at, where I'm leading workshops on listening, which introduces also biases and filters, and then teaches students, faculty, and staff how to listen to each other and how to really get each other's experience on a campus where there's been a lot of racism issues. What's been really fantastic is inside of these forums where we're focused on listening and having these conversations, that white students, white professors, you know, who are involved have had the, you know, response of, wow, we didn't know this stuff was going on, and it's been a safe space for them to hear it. And on the flip side, the Black students of color, and their Indigenous students also, you know, have shared that over the course of this program, which has been 3 months so far, that they've noticed a shift, that they know who's participating, because in the classroom, they're catching themselves saying things that would have been offensive otherwise. They're catching that graphics they were using for math equations to, you know, demonstrate could be offensive. They're catching that, you know, other students who are resident advisors, you know, in housing, have been more aware of how they're interacting. And so there is a shift that comes through this. And, you know, like Melvin was saying, like it's the folks who are interested, who want to know, who do the work, like they're able to do that. And it takes time, and it's a you know, it's like, I'm always working on my side as a cis white male. You know, I'm always involved in conversations and taking courses and you know, hiring coaches who are Black, you know, as well, just to stay sharp and to also keep educated, and to be able to stay in that position where I can bridge those conversations and then amplify the voices of those who can really speak from a place of authority, you know, which are, you know, the people who are Black, people who are of color, in those situations. Because ultimately, I'm not an expert by a long shot, and I know how to have people listen to each other. So that's where I come in.
So Matthew, let me ask, is the best place to attack the lack of listening when it comes to sexism and racism? Would you feel one of the best places to attack this battle is actually in the college campuses?
And corporations, but yeah, I mean, the earlier we can have, I mean, even like if we could get into high schools and middle schools and all of that, I mean, it's so the racism and sexism are so, and actually, I mean, all the isms, right? Ableism, ageism, we are categorized into everything, and there's always something to deal with. And then there's the intersections, you know. And so the sooner we can start, probably, I was going to say educating, but I think it's uneducating everybody. Like the earlier we can start that, the better off we're all going to be, you know, because we're not born. I say we as white, we're not born racist, and we're born into a system that's racist. We're born into families and lineages and all of that, you know, even if they're not like Klan members and Nazis, like there's still like, this is the way it's been, you know, whether we're conscious of it or not. And so the more that we can just address that stuff as soon as it comes up, the better, you know, the better.
Melvin, where do you feel, or what are some of the best ways that we can attack the listening and the isms?
You know what, Dr. Vibe? Thank you for asking me that, because I'm going to bring up answer you as a former athlete. There's a great quote divide with the whole Colin Kaepernick thing. But I'm telling both of you gentlemen right now, that's the best place to start. People love sports. I don't care what we say. I'm an academician myself. I believe in academics, obviously. People love sports. Had there been more people to simply say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we need to discuss that instead of trying to vilify Kaepernick, that would have been much more positive movement.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I want to address that. Look at all the universities: Southern Mississippi, Mississippi State, Ohio State, LSU. The list goes on and on and on and on. What do you see? 60, 70, 80% African American athletes. Because of the myth, and I do say myth, that Black athletes are inherently better by birth. I don't know of many, including myself, that does not work extremely hard, if I can call it a craft, at honing their craft. But stereotypically, you know, people like to push that analogy that athletes of color are just better genetically. Okay, there may be some genetic differences, as we discover things all the time. But when you see those superstar athletes, I guarantee you, brother, they're in that weight room, they're out there on that track running, they are trying to eat nutritiously the whole nine. So you go to your athletes because people want to have something to cheer about. Yeah. I guarantee you, if people would get athletes to talking about equality, and Matthew is saying it, I know you are too, Dr. Vibe, we're not talking about pointing fingers. We're talking about having a conversation. Yeah. We are talking about what's really happening to the guy next door, to the guy down the street. And people kill me with the socialism craziness talk. If you have a flat, don't you want someone to stop and help you? Socialism. If you're hungry, don't you want someone to help feed you? Socialism. If you are in a bad place and you just need someone to talk to, socialism. So when I hear all of this craziness, even especially from Black people, I'll be honest. Oh, well, you know, I'm a conservative. What has been a conservative? What is that really? So, and I'm tying the two together, the so-called socialism and conservatism talk, along with what I'm saying about athletes. Oh, well, they should just, that's not the place. Why is it not? If you talk to African-American athletes in 2020, if you get them to have enough guts, and I do mean guts, to talk about the discrimination that they face as athletes on teams right now, at USC, at University of Michigan, at LSU, etc., how they are pitted against one another to make the university look better, or how they lose positions if, because of our racism, you know, you can find an athlete of less melanation that is maybe comparable but not as good as a guy that looks like me. He's going to get a preference because they're trying to set a tone. So if people would just sit down and talk to athletes and have athletes to go forth in the movement. Kaepernick had it right, whether they want to say it or not. Way back during the baseball era, they had it right. But we allowed people, just like we're doing right now, we allowed, just like the White House is bullying people, we allowed people to bully us. and Matthew and Dr. Vibe, if you'll allow me to say, since Dr. Vibe asked a question about that, I tell my wife all the time, when I see a person hurting, what in the world does that have to do with me assisting that person? Simply because he has equal or more melanation or less or no melanation. His pain is real. His frustration is real. His disgust is real. His mishap is real. So I'll be honest with you, Brother Matthew and Dr. Vibe. Because of the power of athletics, people need to understand that's where to start. Athletes have a voice if they choose to use it. Universities and colleges have a voice if they choose to use that voice to have conversations, not to point fingers, to reveal and open things up.
Nice.
Yeah.
As we close it out, Matthew, anything that you want to add to what Melvin has just shared, and closing thoughts on the whole area of listening, racism, sexism, and isms, and where people can get in contact with you?
Yeah. No, I just think that, I mean, that's brilliant, and you're so right that, you know, it's easy to dismiss actors and entertainers, you know, but sports, I think, is even more ingrained in the culture in the United States, and I do think you're right. You know, if more folks had kneeled with Kaepernick, if there was a real movement around that, like that would have forced more of a discussion, because then it's like, you know, okay, well, what are we gonna do, you know? So yeah, I think that's spot on. Yeah. As far as wrapping it up, is that I feel like we have so much more to talk about. This has
That's
been
what we're going to
really
do a
great for
part
me.
two.
Yeah.
That's what we're going to do a part two.
Sure. Well, I can be reached at coachwithmatthewsolomon.com, and I coach individuals and couples, and then I do work with corporations and colleges and organizations around having conversation and having relationships and partnerships that work. And from my perspective, this is what it takes to create a cultural transformation, a shift in our society to where we're really invested in each other and we're really connected and partnered with each other.
Melvin, how can people reach out to you?
Well, Dr. Vibe and Matthew, it's been great being with you, gentlemen. They can reach me at www.dyingonmyfeet.com. Once they get there, they'll find all of my social media sites. And also, I'd like to give them my cell number. I keep it with me 24 hours a day, 440-935-0374.
And he does answer his phone, and he does have conversations on the Get Vocal platform, which he didn't mention.
Awesome.
Yes, the Nobody Asked Me guy show.
Thank you.
Hey Matthew, I have to tell my mentor, it's all because of him. I joined him a while back, and he was doing such wonderful work. And he said, hey man, he said, maybe you should start doing this. And I thought about it. I said, you know what? I'm going to take Dr. Vibe up on that. And I tell him all the time, man, you know, just like the conversation we are having right now, is that we don't have enough people to actually be genuine enough to have real conversations and bring things to the forefront. So that's why I say, without massaging Dr. Vibe's ego, I'm just saying it to him very honestly, is that when I am blessed to encounter people that actually talk about substance and have some substance to share and try to make the world a better place, man, I'm on board. So I just thank you for asking me to come on, Dr. Vibe. And I need to talk to you and Matthew, man. I love what Matthew's doing. I need to ride that train with you, brother.
You're on board. You're on board, my man. All right. Well, just to close it off here, I am Dr. Vibe, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, 2018 award winner when it comes to innovation given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. I'd like to say thanks to Matthew, thanks to Melvin, because Melvin hosted a conversation just before mine, and I appreciate it and don't take it for granted that he jumped on. I also want to say big thanks to Bobby, I.A. Lewis. Thank you, I.A. Lewis, is saying good work, fantastic. There were people who jumped on via YouTube, I'd like to say thank you. You didn't make any comments, but you watched, but that's all right. And if I didn't include you, it's because of my head, not my heart, if I didn't get your name out there. Next, coming up on the Dr. Vibe Show tomorrow night, we have a gentleman. It's 9 p.m. Eastern Time, named Jeff A.D. Martin. Oh, also one other person I got to thank, Danny Stone, watching on the Facebook Live. And I'm going to make sure I include, he had made a comment. I want to make sure that we get his comment in here. And he said, yes, sports, music, and movie and entertainment is a great place to start. People identify with athletes, artists, and actors. So he's just verifying what you gentlemen said a few moments ago. Yes, tomorrow night, Jeff A.D. Martin, one of 10 men that have written this book called New Me, 10 Stories of Perseverance. And it's an excellent read. And actually, Danny Stone is also one of the authors. Sorry, he's one of the authors. I had him on the conversation last week. Jeff A.D. Martin, the gentleman who spearheaded this project, and it's 10 men from the Greater Toronto area, 10 Black men. And my goal is to have each one of them on the platform sharing their story. He's going to be with us 9 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow night, February 18th. Then February 19th, we have a gentleman named M.J. Durkin, and he's going to be talking about men and vulnerability. So we have more epic conversations coming. I know I have something on Wednesday, but I can't remember. But you know what? Just follow me and you'll find out. So best place to follow me on, just go to my website, thedrvibeshow.com. As always, I like to say, live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Next up, sometimes you have to get small to get stronger. Block assumptions. And finally, aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Matthew will be back. Melvin will be back. And all of you, we hope you're back. God bless. Peace well. Keep the faith. And good night, everybody.